The smell was the first thing. Not just the rotting meat smell of the dead, though that was certainly there, clinging to the air like a shroud. No, this was something else. A chemical tang, like ozone mixed with old blood and something deeply, viscerally wrong. It hung heavy in the suffocating heat of the abandoned apartment building, a warning that echoed the frantic pounding of my own heart against my ribs. I pressed myself tighter against the grimy wall of the 7th floor hallway, the chipped paint gritty against my cheek. My breath hitched, a silent, desperate prayer for invisibility. Below me, on the street, the groans were a constant, churning tide. But it wasn't the shufflers I was worried about, not anymore. Something had changed. Just yesterday, I'd been so sure that if I could just stay hidden, keep quiet, avoid the hordes, I might make it. I'd spent weeks mastering the art of the ghost, slipping through shadows, rationing canned goods, always moving, always listening. My go bag, once a ridiculous prepper fantasy, was now an extension of my arm. My carefully sharpened machete, heavy and reassuring in my trembling hand, felt like the only real thing left in a world gone mad. Then I saw it, or rather heard it. It had been chasing a straggler, a woman who had broken cover from a grocery store. The usual infected were slow, shambling, predictable. You could outwalk them, outthink them, but this one had moved with a terrifying grace, a blurring speed that defied everything I knew about the turning. It hadn't just sprinted, it had leaped, clearing a wrecked car like a predator clearing a fence. It tackled her in a horrifying blur, and the screams that followed were cut brutally short, not with a prolonged struggle, but with an immediate, sickening crunch. It wasn't just hungry, it was hunting. And the way it had scanned the street after, not just blindly stumbling, but looking, assessing. A cold dread had settled deep in my bones. The rules had changed. When the infected evolved to hunt, humanity faced extinction. That truth, stark and brutal, had never felt more real than in that moment. Now, that same terrifying speed seemed to be echoing on the floor above me. Footfalls. Not the dragging shuffle I'd grown accustomed to. These were distinct, purposeful, like something heavy but agile, and they were getting closer. I sucked in a ragged breath, the metallic taste of fear coating my tongue. My grip tightened on the machete, knuckles white. The rusty fire escape outside the window was my only way out. 7 stories down, a broken ladder at the 3rd floor. A fall meant certain death, or worse, becoming one of them. But staying meant facing whatever new nightmare was ascending the building. The footsteps paused. Directly above my head, my heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. Every fiber of my being screamed at me to run, to move, but I was frozen, breath held, listening with an intensity that bordered on pain. A low growl, deeper than any infected I'd heard, vibrated through the ceiling. It wasn't the mindless hunger groan. It sounded deliberate, possessive. A shadow fell across the frosted glass panel of the apartment door directly to my left. It was a distorted silhouette, larger, more angular than a normal human. My eyes darted to the peeling paint of the door, then to the rickety fire escape. The choice was clear: risk the fall or become prey. With a silent prayer, I took a step back, angling myself toward the window, ready to make my desperate move. The shadow on the glass shifted, turning, and I heard a wet sniffing sound from directly behind the door. It smelled me. It knew I was here. What would happen if it burst through? I didn't want to know. My stomach churned, a bitter bile rising in my throat. This was it. The moment I became a part of their horrifying new food chain. This was the end of the old world, and I was desperately, terrifyingly alone. The memory of the world before was a cruel phantom. Just a few weeks ago, this apartment building had been a hive of mundane lives. Arguments over parking, the smell of garlic and spices from a distant kitchen, the faint thrum of a washing machine. Now, it was a tomb. The air was thick with decay and dust. Broken glass crunched under my worn boots, and every shadow seemed to hold a lurking terror. I remembered Mrs. Henderson from the third floor, always complaining about the noise. Now, she was probably one of them, or worse. The thought made my stomach clench. My escape from the seventh floor was a blur of adrenaline and raw instinct. The moment the doorknob rattled, a dry, rasping click that cut through the silence like a knife, I moved. I didn't think, I simply reacted. A swift kick shattered the grimy window pane, sending shards of glass scattering across the hallway floor with a deafening crash. The sound was a magnet, immediately drawing the attention of whatever was behind the door, and the shamblers below. I didn't wait. I lunged, through the jagged opening, hands grasping for the cold, rusted metal of the fire escape ladder. The ancient iron groaned under my weight, the vibrations singing up my arms. My boots scrabbled for purchase on the narrow grates, sending flakes of rust drifting into the humid air. I didn't look down, not even for a second. Looking down meant seeing the impossible distance, meant losing my nerve. From inside the apartment, a guttural shriek erupted, closer, more powerful than anything I'd heard from the infected before. It wasn't human. It wasn't animal. It was something else, something primal and terrifyingly aware. The window frame shuddered as something slammed against it from within, a desperate lunge that very nearly caught my foot. I felt the hot, fetid breath on my ankle, a momentary brush of cold, decaying flesh, and a jolt of pure horror surged through me. My stomach lurched. I bit back a cry, hauling myself down the ladder with desperate speed. My hands burned, raw from the friction and the biting rust. Each rung felt colder than the last, a metallic echo of the growing chill in my heart. The familiar, rhythmic moans of the street-level infected were getting louder, responding to the noise. They were gathering. I could hear the scraping of fingernails on brick, the wet sloshing of bodies moving through the debris-strewn alleyway below. At the third floor, the ladder ended abruptly, sheared off with jagged edges. A drop of maybe 8 feet to the ground. In the chaos of the early days, before the infected evolved to hunt, I might have just jumped, risked a sprained ankle. Now, with faster, smarter predators below, any injury was a death sentence. I hung there for a moment, my lungs burning, the stench of decay rising from the alley like a tangible threat. A guttural roar echoed from the broken seventh-floor window. It was still there, still looking, still hunting. The distinct click-clack of agile movement on the fire escape above told me it wasn't giving up. It was descending. This new breed, these evolved infected, they were different. They didn't just pursue blindly, they tracked, they planned. My mind raced, frantic, desperate. What did I have? My machete, my go bag, my wits. Not much against something that could scale buildings and hunt with such terrifying precision. Humanity faced extinction, and I was just one lone, terrified person clinging to a rusty ladder. I spotted it then. A broken awning, several feet below the end of the fire escape, stretched precariously over a dumpster. It was flimsy, torn, but maybe, just maybe, it could break my fall. It was a desperate gamble. Above me, the rhythmic scrape of claws on metal intensified. The evolved infected was on the 6th floor now, then the 5th. It was fast, too fast. I could hear it breathing, a wet, rasping sound that turned my blood to ice. I closed my eyes for a fraction of a second, took a deep, shuddering breath, and then let go. The fall was jarring, a sickening lurch as gravity took hold. I hit the awning hard, a canvas and metal symphony of ripping fabric and groaning supports. The impact knocked the wind clean out of me, sending a searing pain through my ribs. For a moment, I was suspended, tangled in the torn canvas, before the whole thing gave way with a final, protesting shriek of bending metal. I landed awkwardly, half tumbled into the overflowing dumpster below. The stench inside was overwhelming, A toxic cocktail of garbage, rot, and the pervasive metallic tang of blood. My head cracked against something hard, sending stars dancing behind my eyes. I lay there, momentarily stunned, gasping for air, the pain in my side flaring with every shallow breath. I could hear the infected below, closer now, drawn by the noise. A low growl, unmistakably the evolved one, echoed from the fire escape, now just feet above me. It was looking down. I could feel its gaze. I scrambled out of the dumpster, wincing with every movement. My vision swam, my side ached, but I was alive, for now. I glanced back up at the fire escape. The evolved infected stood at the edge, silhouetted against the bruised purple of the morning sky. Its head was cocked, listening. It seemed to be assessing the alley, the surrounding buildings. It wasn't just a brute, it was a hunter. I limped away, weaving through the discarded refuse, my machete clutched tight. The shamblers were still focused on the noise, but they were slow. The evolved one was the real threat. I needed cover. I needed to disappear. And most of all, I needed to understand what these new monsters were before they erased what little remained of humanity. My ribs burned, my hands were raw, and my heart hammered with a desperate primal fear. This wasn't just survival anymore. This was a war against something utterly alien, something that had learned to hunt us. What would you do, knowing every shadow held a predator smarter and faster than anything you'd ever imagined? I still didn't have all the answers, but I knew one thing. I wasn't going to let this be the end of my story. The alley was a labyrinth of shadows and discarded dreams. Broken furniture, overflowing dumpsters, the ghosts of 1,000 forgotten lives. Each creak of metal, each gust of wind rustling through shattered windows made me flinch. My breath was still ragged, a rasping sound in my throat, and the ache in my ribs was a constant, throbbing reminder of my close call. I needed to find a safe place, somewhere to bind my wounds, somewhere to think. I spotted a partially open service entrance, a steel door slightly ajar, leading into what looked like the back of a restaurant. A faint, almost imperceptible whiff of stale grease and something vaguely sweet, old pastries perhaps, drifted out. It wasn't ideal, but it was better than the exposed alley. Better than waiting for the evolved hunter to pick up my trail. I pushed the door open slowly, machete held ready. It groaned on rusted hinges, a sound it seemed deafening in the oppressive silence. The interior was dark, smelling of rot and old food. Moonlight, filtering through a grimy skylight high above, cast long, distorted shadows across the checkered floor. Broken chairs lay overturned, tables upturned, a silent testament to the panic that had swept through this place weeks ago. A single desiccated corpse, slumped over a counter, its skin stretched taut and yellow, seemed to stare at me with empty eye sockets. Not one of them, just a victim of the initial chaos. A lucky one, I thought grimly, spared the turning. I moved deeper into the restaurant, past the dining area and into the kitchen. Stainless steel counters gleamed dully in the faint light, spattered with dried blood and something else, something I didn't want to examine too closely. Empty pots and pans hung from racks, swaying slightly in the phantom breeze that whispered through the shattered windows. This place was a treasure trove of potential supplies, if I could ignore the pervasive horror. My eyes scanned the room, searching for anything useful. A first aid kit, food, a more secure hiding spot. The cold dread from the streets still clung to me, a persistent shiver that had nothing to do with the temperature. The evolution, that was the word that kept echoing in my mind. Not a mutation, not just a faster variant. This was something deeper, something terrifyingly intelligent. It made my blood run cold. I found a small staff locker room off the kitchen, barely large enough for 2 people. A shower stall, a single toilet, and a few lockers. It was small, cramped, but it had a solid-looking metal door. I could barricade it, buy myself some time. That was the most I could hope for in this new world. Time. I dragged a heavy stainless steel prep cable across the kitchen, its legs scraping agonizingly against the tiles, before wedging it against the locker room door. Not perfect, but it would slow anything down. I then moved to the single window, just a small, grimy pane looking out onto a narrow gap between buildings. It was too small for anything to get through, but it offered a sliver of natural light. Inside the locker room, I finally allowed myself to relax a fraction, leaning against the cold tile wall, letting the machete clatter to the floor. My hands were shaking, my legs felt like jelly. I sank to the floor, pulling off my torn shirt to examine my side. A nasty bruise was forming, angry purple and red, but no broken bones, just soft tissue damage. I reached into my go bag, pulling out a roll of medical tape and a sterile pad. My movements were slow, deliberate, each touch of the tape sending a fresh throb of pain through my ribs. As I worked, my mind drifted back to the initial days, the first week. The disbelief. The frantic news reports, quickly replaced by static. The screams from neighboring apartments. I remembered my elderly neighbor, Mr. Harrison, a veteran, pounding on my door, face pale, eyes wide with a terror I'd never seen in him. "Alex, it's not the flu. They're eating people." His voice had been a broken whisper. I'd helped him barricade his door, shared my last bottle of water. I hadn't seen him since. That image, the sheer terror in his eyes, was burned into my memory. That was when humanity faced extinction, not with a bang, but with a series of wet, tearing sounds. I finished taping my ribs, then scavenged the lockers. Empty. No surprise. Most people had fled in a desperate, futile rush, leaving everything behind. I found a half-empty bottle of disinfectant, a miracle find, and cleaned the raw abrasions on my hands. The sting was a welcome distraction from the persistent thrum of fear. The silence was broken only by the distant, muted groans from the street. The evolved one hadn't followed me into the restaurant, or if it had, it was moving silently, waiting. That thought was almost worse than the direct chase. The idea that these things were not just faster, but smarter, capable of stalking, of patience. It was a terrifying escalation. I pulled out my map, a tattered city street map I'd been using since day one. My original plan had been simple. Head north, get out of the city, find a small town, something isolated. Now that plan felt laughably naive. If the infected evolved to hunt, if they could move with that speed and cunning, then nowhere was safe. Not farms, not isolated cabins. They would find us. They would hunt us down, one by one, until humanity faced extinction. I traced a line on the map with a grimy finger, my stomach growling in protest. I needed food. I needed water. I needed rest. But most of all, I needed to know if that rumor was real. Because if it wasn't, then there was truly no hope left for any of us. The choice was clear: embrace the impossible or succumb to the inevitable. My hand trembled as I folded the map, the faint sound of footsteps, closer now, echoing from the kitchen. It was moving, not shuffling, but deliberately, testing. It was still hunting me. I picked up my machete. The sounds from the kitchen were getting bolder now, not just the subtle shifts of debris or the phantom creaks of an old building, but distinct, heavy thuds, like something was deliberately testing the barricade. My heart hammered, a frantic drum against my ribs, each beat sending a fresh jolt of pain through my bruised side. I pressed my ear to the cold metal of the locker room door, trying to discern the exact nature of the threat. It wasn't a horde. The sounds were singular, purposeful. The evolved infected. It had found me. Or rather, it had waited, and now it was making its move. I could hear a wet, guttural sniff, then a low rumble, almost a purr, from the other side. It sounded like a satisfied predator, confident in its hunt. The thought made my blood run cold. It wasn't just reacting, it was thinking. I backed away from the door, grabbing my machete. The blade, dull silver in the faint light, felt like a meager defense against something so relentlessly savage. My pistol, a small .22 I'd found in an abandoned patrol car, felt even more inadequate. A pup gun against a monster. I had limited ammo, maybe a dozen rounds for the pistol, and the machete was only good in close quarters, against one target. Against this new threat, I didn't know if it would be enough. The first impact against the door was a sickening thud, hard enough to rattle the entire frame, sending a shower of plaster dust drifting from the ceiling. The barricaded prep table groaned, scraping an inch or two across the tiled floor. The sound was deafening in the confined space. I could feel the vibrations through the floor, through the very air. It hit again, a relentless, focused assault. The metal door began to buckle inward at the center, a slow, agonizing bend that revealed the sheer, unnatural strength of this creature. This wasn't the mindless tearing of a typical infected. This was calculated. It was trying to break through. My mind raced, searching for an escape, for any advantage. The small window was too high, too narrow. The only way out was through that door, past the evolved hunter. And beyond that, past whatever other horrors awaited in the abandoned restaurant, and then into the alley, and then, where? The sheer scale of the collapse, the way humanity faced extinction, pressed down on me with suffocating weight. I thought of my sister, Sarah. Her bright, easy laugh, the way she used to tease me about my doomsday prepping. "What are you gonna do with that go bag, Alex? Build a fort in the backyard?" I remembered her face, filled with concern, when I'd warned her about a flu season a few years back. She'd always been the optimistic one, the one who saw the best in people, the best in the world. I hadn't been able to reach her when it started. The cell towers had gone down so fast. I still carried her photo, a dog-eared picture from her college graduation, tucked deep in my bag. It was the only thing that kept me from giving up sometimes. What would she say if she saw me now, bruised and bleeding, huddled in a locker room, waiting to be hunted? The prep table shifted again, sliding another agonizing inch. The door was groaning, bending further. Splintering sounds came from the wall where the hinges were anchored. This wasn't gonna hold, not for long. I looked around the tiny locker room, the shower head, the toilet.
Could I use anything as a weapon? No, too flimsy, too small. My eyes fell on the metal coat hooks, firmly bolted into the wall. Not a weapon, but an idea. A desperate, insane idea. If I could pull it through the door, draw its attention, then maybe I could slip past. But it was too big, too fast. I needed to do something more, something that would disable it, at least momentarily. Then I saw it. A can of industrial-strength clinger, forgotten under the sink. Heavy-duty degreaser, meant for kitchen floors. It had a spray nozzle. It wasn't a weapon, but it was a blinding agent. My last-ditch effort. I grabbed the can, my hands sweating. It felt impossibly light, utterly insufficient. But it was all I had. I pulled the small pistol from my belt, checked the magazine. 11 rounds. Not enough to clear a room full of infected, but maybe enough to put down one if I aimed well, if I was fast enough. The door burst inward with a splintering crash. The prep table flew across the kitchen, slamming against the far wall with a deafening clang. Through the gaping maw of the doorway, it appeared. Taller than a man, gaunt, skeletal, its skin a sickly gray. Its limbs were too long, too articulated, ending in wickedly sharp claws that glinting in the faint light. Its eyes, deep-set and hollow, glowed with a malevolent, intelligent hunger. Its jaw was elongated, full of jagged, needle-like teeth, constantly working. This wasn't just a zombie. This was the predator, the evolved hunter I'd seen on the street. It stood there, framed in the doorway, its head cocked, sniffing the air. It wasn't rushing. It was assessing, just like a hunter. Its gaze swept the room, locked on to me. A low growl rumbled in its chest, a sound that promised agonizing death. "When the infected evolved to hunt," I whispered, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. "This is what they became." It lunged, not a clumsy stagger, but a lightning-fast leap that covered the distance to the locker room in a blink. I didn't hesitate. I squeezed the trigger of the pistol. Once, twice, 3 times. The small caliber round smacked uselessly against its chest, barely slowing it, eliciting nothing more than a frustrated snarl. Its hide was tougher than any infected I'd encountered. It was almost on me. I raised the can of degreaser, aimed for its eyes, and squeezed the trigger, a cloud of caustic chemicals erupting from the nozzle. The hunter recoiled, screeching, a sound like tearing metal that made my teeth ache. Its claws raked the air blindly, and I felt a searing pain as one caught my arm, tearing a deep gash through my jacket and into the flesh beneath. I dropped the can, clutching my arm, but the brief reprieve was enough. I dodged to the side, machete suddenly heavy and solid in my hand. It was blinded, disoriented. Now was my chance. I swung the machete in a desperate, wide arc, aiming for its neck. The blade connected with a sickening thud, severing tendon, bone, and flesh. The hunter staggered, a choked gurgle replacing its shriek. Black fluid, thick and vicious, poured from the wound. It still stood, swaying, twitching, its head tilted at an unnatural angle. Its claws still swiped blindly at the air. This wasn't enough. It was still alive, still a threat, still hunting. I needed to finish it. My heart pounded, pain in my arm forgotten in the rush of adrenaline. I remembered what the old whispers had said about the original infected. Head trauma, only head trauma. Was it the same for these evolved monsters? I had to believe it was. I stepped back, took a deep breath, and brought the machete down again, this time with all my strength, aiming for the top of its skull. The blade sliced through bone, sinking deep, and the hunter finally collapsed, a dead weight hitting the tile floor with a heavy thud. It lay still, its body twitching for a few agonizing seconds, then went limp. I stood over it, gasping for air, the machete heavy in my trembling hand. My arm burned, a sharp, insistent pain that brought me back to reality. I looked at the gash. It was deep, bleeding freely. Not a bite, thank God, but a serious wound. And the fluid that had come from the creature, was it infectious? I didn't know. The fear, the uncertainty, was a constant companion in this new world. I slumped against the wall, sliding to the floor, my eyes fixed on the grotesque corpse. It was defeated, but the image of its intelligence, its predatory cunning, was seared into my mind. This was the new enemy. This was why humanity faced extinction. What would I do now? My arm was bleeding, my supplies were dwindling, and the city was teeming with these new, terrifying hunters. The sanctuary in the mountains seemed 1,000,000 miles away, but giving up wasn't an option, not yet. I had to keep moving. I had to keep fighting, for Sarah, for humanity, and for the desperate, fleeting hope that somewhere, someone else was still alive, still resisting. What would you do when every shadow held a predator smarter and faster than anything you'd ever imagined? I still didn't have all the answers, but I knew one thing. I wasn't going to let this be the end of my story. The adrenaline rush faded, leaving me hollowed out and aching. My arm throbbed, a relentless drumbeat of pain that matched the exhaustion settling deep in my bones. The degreaser had indeed worked to blind the creature, but at what cost? Its claws, long and sharp, had torn through my jacket and into the muscle of my forearm. I stared at the wound, a ragged, ugly gash, oozing dark blood. No bite, that much was a relief, but the fear of infection, any infection, lingered like a foul taste. Was its blood contagious? Was that even possible? This new evolution had shattered every assumption I'd clung to about the infected. I stumbled out of the locker room, past the grotesque corpse of the evolved hunter, its sightless eyes staring up at the shattered ceiling. The kitchen was still a mess of overturned tables and debris, but now there was a fresh smell of metallic blood mingling with the old decay. I needed to move. Staying here, even for a moment, felt like an invitation for more of them. They were drawn to noise, to scent, and I was bleeding, exposed. My go bag was still inside the locker room. I retrieved it, rummaging for my dwindling first aid supplies. I found a small bottle of antiseptic, cold and biting as it hit the open wound. I winced, sucking in a sharp breath. Then a fresh roll of bandages. My fingers, trembling with exhaustion, worked slowly, wrapping the bandage tight around my forearm. It wouldn't stop the pain, but it would staunch the bleeding and hopefully prevent anything from getting into the wound. Another precious bandage used. My supplies were running critically low. As I worked, my eyes drifted to the skylight, where the moonlight, now higher, cast a pale, ghostly glow onto the kitchen floor. The city outside was a symphony of distant chaos, sporadic gunshots, the wail of far-off sirens quickly cut short, and the ever-present undulating moan of the infected. But beneath it all, I could almost imagine the new, terrifying silence of the hunters, moving through the streets, unseen, unheard, until they struck. This was no longer a simple struggle for survival. It was a desperate race against a rapidly adapting foe. When the infected evolved to hunt, they didn't just get faster, they became smarter. They became predators, and humanity faced extinction because of it. I needed to get out. My map, the rumored sanctuary, that was my only beacon in this overwhelming darkness. It was a faint hope, a whisper on the wind, but it was enough to keep me moving. I needed to cross half the state, through urban ruins and treacherous wilderness. It would be a death march, but the alternative was simply waiting to be found. I cautiously approached the now collapsed doorway of the restaurant service entrance. The moon was bright enough to illuminate the alley. A quick scan confirmed it was empty, for now. The crash of the prep table and the gunshots must have drawn any nearby shamblers away. And the evolved hunter was now dead. It was a momentary reprieve, a chance. I slipped out into the alley, moving with slow, measured steps, each one a conscious effort to minimize sound.
The night air was cooler now, but carried the same stench of decay. My eyes darted from shadow to shadow, every instinct on high alert. I was a ghost again, but a wounded one, a vulnerable one. My route was simple: head north. Follow the major arteries out of the city, avoiding the most heavily infested areas, then veer off into the quieter, more overgrown suburban sprawl. I knew the area reasonably well from my old delivery job. Back then, it was just a grid of houses, parks, and strip malls. Now, it was a gauntlet of death. I moved from alley to alley, keeping to the shadows, listening for the telltale sounds of either shufflers or hunters. The shamblers were easier to avoid. Their groans and dragging feet announced their presence long before they became a threat. It was the silence I feared, the sudden, swift movement that would signal an evolved one. Hours crawled by. My injured arm throbbed, making every swing of the machete, every push against the stubborn fence, a new agony. I passed abandoned cars, their doors ajar, interiors ransacked. The pathetic remnants of people's lives scattered on the pavement. A child's toy, a crumpled family photo, an empty wallet. Each item a stark reminder of the countless lives extinguished in the blink of an eye. The sheer, overwhelming scale of loss was a suffocating weight. Humanity faced extinction, not with a valiant last stand, but with desperate, futile panic. Dawn was painting the sky in bruised purples and grays when I reached the city's outskirts. The buildings here were smaller, mostly single-family homes, now overgrown with weeds and vines. Nature was already reclaiming what humanity had built, a slow, silent erosion of our once dominant presence. The air was slightly cleaner here, less of the urban decay, but the sense of unease was no less potent. I needed water. My canteen was nearly empty and my throat was raw. I spotted a small convenience store, its front window shattered, door hanging precariously open. It looked picked clean, like most places, but sometimes, if you were lucky, you found something hidden. A forgotten carton of juice, a six-pack of bottled water tucked behind a shelf. It was a risk, but a necessary one. Dehydration was as deadly as any infected. I approached cautiously, machete ready. The silence here was different, less oppressive than the city, more natural. Birdsong, faint but clear, drifted from a nearby overgrown park. a cruel reminder of a world we'd lost. I pushed the door open, the broken glass crunching under my boots. The interior was a wreck, shelves overturned, merchandise scattered, a thin layer of dust covering everything. It looked like a tornado had ripped through it. No, not a tornado. People. Desperate people, fighting for the last scraps.
My eyes scanned the aisles, my ears straining for any sound. Nothing. Just a faint rustle of dust motes and the slivers of sunlight filtering through the broken windows. I moved toward the back, where the refrigerator section would have been. Empty, of course. Canned goods, too. Then I saw it. Tucked behind a fallen display of stale chips, a single bottle of water, unopened. It felt like a miracle. I grabbed it, my fingers closing around the cold plastic. Sweet, blessed water. I tore off the cap and drank, slowly, savoring each drop, the cool liquid a balm to my parched throat. It was the purest joy I'd felt in weeks. But even as I drank, the ever-present paranoia gnawed at me. This was too easy. The silence felt wrong, too complete. I finished the water, recapped the bottle, and stashed it in my bag. I needed to get out. As I turned, a sound. Not a groan, not a shuffle. A high-pitched, almost chirping click. It came from the back storage room. Not loud, but distinctive, and too similar to the sounds the evolved hunter had made. My blood ran cold. I froze, machete rising instinctively. My eyes darted to the storage room door, half open, a black void in the dim light. Was it just one, or more? Had they set a trap? Was this a new tactic? The thought made a fresh wave of terror surge through me. When the infected evolved to hunk, did they also learn to lure? I heard it again, closer, that same unsettling click. My breath caught in my throat. The research facility, the sanctuary. It felt impossibly far, but I had to reach it. I had to know if there was still hope. I took a step backward, machete held ready, my eyes fixed on the darkness of the storage room. What would I find in there? A new nightmare, or just the silence of a forgotten place? I still didn't know, but I knew one thing. I wasn't going to wait to find out. The storage room was a black maw, swallowing what little light the shattered windows provided. The clicking sound, high-pitched and irregular, was definitely coming from inside. It was unlike any infected noise I'd heard before, more complex, almost conversational. A fresh wave of dread washed over me. This wasn't just another hunter. This was something new, something that evolved even further. My hand tightened on the machete. My pistol felt heavy, inadequate. My arm throbbed, a constant ache. Every instinct screamed at me to turn and run, to disappear into the overgrown suburban streets. But the thought of the sanctuary, the desperate hope it represented, kept me rooted. I needed to understand these things if I was to have any chance of reaching it. Understanding was survival. I took a deep breath, the air thick with dust and the lingering scent of stale cardboard. I edged closer to the storage room door, pushing it open slowly with the tip of my boot. It scraped across the concrete floor, a sound that seemed to echo for miles. The room was dark, packed with shelves of forgotten inventory, dusty boxes of candy, empty soda crates, broken cleaning supplies. The clicking intensified, coming from behind a tall stack of boxes near the back. My eyes, adjusting to the gloom, made out a faint, distorted shape. And then I saw them. Not one, three. They were smaller than the evolved hunter from the apartment building, almost childlike in their gaunt frames. But what they lacked in size, they made up for in sheer, unsettling wrongness. Their skin was paler, almost translucent, revealing a network of pulsing veins beneath. Their heads were elongated, with large black eyes that seemed to absorb the light. And their mouths were not the gaping, ripped jaws of the shamblers, nor the needle-toothed maw of the hunter. These were smaller, almost beak-like, constantly opening and closing, producing that unnerving clicking sound. They moved on all fours, scuttling like insects, their long spindly limbs ending in clawed hands and feet that were almost prehensile. They weren't just fast, they were agile, and they were communicating. When the infected evolved to hunt, I whispered, the words barely audible, they also learned to coordinate. One of them, the smallest, turned its head, its black eyes fixing on me with an unsettling intelligence. It didn't growl, it simply clicked, a sharp, quick burst of sound. The other two immediately went still, their clicking ceasing. All three stared at me, unblinking, assessing. They weren't reacting to noise, they were reacting to me. They were aware. My blood ran cold. This was a whole new level of terror. The world had gone from bad to unimaginable. Humanity faced extinction not from mindless hordes, but from intelligent, coordinated predators. I raised my machete, my hand trembling. The smallest one, the one that had looked at me, clicked again, and the other two began to flank me, scuttling silently along the edges of the shelves, moving with a speed that defied their size. They were trying to encircle me. A tactic, a hunt. I fired the pistol, a desperate, reflexive action. The shot echoed deafeningly in the small room, deafening my ears. The bullet hit the lead creature in the chest. It flinched, but barely, emitting a high-pitched, chittering shriek that sent shivers down my spine. It wasn't slowing down. Its thin hide, like the larger hunter, seemed to offer some resistance. These weren't regular infected. The flanking creatures moved faster, darting in and out of the shadows. I could hear the scrabble of their claws on the concrete, the faint rustle of their movements. I was trapped, surrounded. I remembered a trick from my old urban survival books, created diversion, draw their attention away. What did I have? The broken bottle of water in my bag, the empty can of degreaser. Not much. I spotted a stack of plastic milk crates near the entrance. If I could knock them over, make a racket. But I couldn't reach them without exposing my back to the flanking creatures. The lead one, the alpha, if that's what it was, lunged. It moved with incredible speed, a blur of gray skin and black eyes. I swung the machete, a desperate wild arc, and it dodged, twisting its body with unnatural flexibility, its clawed hand swiping at my leg. I felt a sharp pain, a tearing sensation, as its claws shredded the fabric of my trousers and raked across my thigh. Not deep, but bleeding. Another wound. I stumbled back, gritting my teeth against the pain. The two flanking creatures were closing in, their clicking sounds intensifying, a symphony of predatory intent. They were moving in for the kill. My eyes darted around, frantic. There was nothing, no escape, no advantage. Just me, a wounded human, facing three evolved, intelligent hunters. This was it, the end. This was how humanity faced extinction. Not with a bang, but with a series of clicks and a desperate, futile struggle in a forgotten back room. Then, a flicker of light, a reflection, from a broken mirror hanging on the far wall, obscured by a dangling string of ancient Christmas lights. The lights themselves were just twisted wires. But the mirror. An idea, desperate and probably suicidal, flashed through my mind. These things had black, light-absorbing eyes. Perhaps they were sensitive to bright, direct light? It was a long shot, a crazy gamble, but I had nothing left to lose. I pulled out my small tactical flashlight from my go bag, its beam surprisingly powerful for its size. The clicking creatures paused, their black eyes glinting in the dim light. They were too close. I had to make my move now. I raised the flashlight, aimed for the lead creature, and clicked it on. The beam, bright and focused, hit its face directly. It recoiled with a violent shriek, scrabbling backward, its clawed hands rising to cover its eyes. The clicking stopped. The other two, momentarily disoriented by the shriek in the sudden light, froze. It was a momentary advantage, a precious second of reprieve. I didn't waste it. I fired the pistol, aiming for the head of the lead creature. The bullet struck, not perfectly, but well enough. It dropped, twitching, then went still. 2 left. The remaining 2 shrieked, a high-pitched, piercing sound that grated on my nerves. They weren't completely blind, but they were definitely affected.
They darted back and forth, their movements more erratic, less coordinated. I clicked the flashlight on and off, sweeping the beam across them. Each flash made them recoil, made them shriek. It was working. I had an advantage. I didn't try to reload the pistol. Too slow. My machete. I lunged, bringing the machete down on the closest creature with all my remaining strength. It shrieked, trying to dodge, but the light was still affecting it. The blade connected, a clean, brutal hit, severing its head from its spindly body. It dropped, convulsing. 1 left. The last one was panicking, clicking furiously, scrambling backward, trying to escape the light. It bumped into a shelf, sending boxes tumbling. I didn't give it a chance. I swept the flashlight over it one last time, blinding it, then brought the machete down. The battle was over. I stood there, gasping, shaking, my leg burning. My arm throbbed. I was covered in dust, sweat, and what looked like black fluid from the creatures. My vision swam, but I was alive. I had survived. Again. I slumped against a shelf, sliding to the floor, my breathing ragged. 3 more evolved infected, defeated. But how many more were out there? How many more ways could they evolve? The clicks they made, the coordination, the way they flanked, it was terrifying. It wasn't just a sickness, it was an intelligence, an adaptation that threatened to wipe us all out. Humanity faced extinction. It was a brutal, undeniable truth. I pulled out my first aid kit again, more bandages for my leg, another splash of antiseptic. Every cut, every scrape was a risk. I closed my eyes, picturing Sarah's face, her laugh, her optimism. It was a fragile shield against the despair that threatened to overwhelm me. The sanctuary, I had to reach it. It was the only reason left to push forward. What kind of world would I find there? Would it be a haven or just another battleground? What would you do when every step forward brought a new, deadlier nightmare? I still didn't know the answer, but I knew one thing. I wasn't going to stop trying. Not while there was still a sliver of hope. The sun was high when I finally emerged from the shattered convenience store, blinking against the harsh light. The air felt heavy, oppressive, even out here in the suburbs. My leg throbbed with every step, and my bandaged arm ached relentlessly. I felt like a walking wound, patched together with tape and sheer stubbornness. But I was alive, and I had learned something horrifyingly new about the enemy. The clickers, as I'd mentally dubbed them, represented a new, terrifying phase in the evolution of the infected. Their coordination, their intelligence, their communication, it was a game changer. The simple act of survival had just become exponentially more complex.
When the infected evolved to hunt, they developed specialized roles, like these agile pack-hunting skirmishers. This wasn't just mindless savagery anymore. It was calculated, strategic. Humanity truly faced extinction. I pushed forward, following the faded lines of the old highway that would eventually lead me north, out of the immediate urban sprawl. The road was a graveyard of abandoned vehicles, twisted metal, and shattered glass. Overgrown weeds pushed through cracks in the asphalt, already beginning to reclaim the concrete veins of civilization. The scale of the collapse was staggering. Every mile was a testament to the swift, brutal end of our world. The journey was a blur of constant vigilance and desperate movement. I rationed my meager food supplies, protein bars, a few stale crackers, and carefully measured sips from my water bottle. Hydration was critical, especially with my injuries. Every abandoned house was a potential haven, but also a potential trap. I checked each one meticulously, machete ready, before daring to enter for a brief rest or a desperate search for supplies. Most were ransacked, empty, or worse, occupied by a few straggling shamblers, easily dispatched, but still a drain on my dwindling energy. The nights were the worst. The silence was broken only by the chirping of crickets, a sound that should have been comforting, but now only amplified my sense of isolation. And then the new sounds, the distant clicks of the evolved hunters, the low guttural growls of the larger, faster ones. Sometimes a high-pitched shriek that made my blood run cold, signaling a new kill or a confrontation between the infected themselves. It was a brutal ecosystem, and I was at the very bottom of the food chain. I encountered a group of shamblers once, perhaps a dozen of them, drawn by some distant sound. I managed to slip past, hiding in the thick undergrowth, my heart hammering against my ribs. It was a terrifying dance, the silent predator observing the mindless ones. I was learning their patterns, their new behaviors. The shamblers were still easy to avoid. The larger hunters stalked alone. The clickers hunted in packs. Each variant required a different strategy, a different level of caution. Days bled into weeks. My clothes were torn, caked with dirt and dried blood. My hair was matted, my face gaunt. I felt like a ghost, haunting the ruins of a world I no longer recognized. The memory of a hot shower, a soft bed, a simple meal with friends felt like a dream from another lifetime. Sometimes a wave of despair would wash over me, a heavy, suffocating blanket that threatened to pull me under. What was the point? Why keep going? Humanity faced extinction. Wasn't it just a matter of time before I succumbed, like everyone else? But then, I'd pull out Sarah's photo, her smiling face a stark contrast to the desolate landscape around me. Her memory was a lifeline, a reason to push through the pain, to keep moving toward that faint, distant hope of a sanctuary. If I gave up, it would be for nothing. Her hope, her life would be utterly extinguished, and I couldn't let that happen. One afternoon, I came across a small, isolated farm. The fields were overgrown, the farmhouse dilapidated, but there was a well and water. My canteen was almost empty. It was a risk, but a calculated one. I approached carefully, machete drawn. The farmyard was eerily quiet, no shamblers, no clicking sounds, just the low hum of insects and the rustle of dry leaves. The well cover was partially open, revealing a dark, cool depths. Salvation. As I began to lower my canteen, I heard it. Not a click, not a growl. A faint, almost imperceptible thump-thump. From inside the barn. My blood ran cold. It wasn't loud enough to be a shambler. It was too regular to be anything natural. I froze, canteen half lowered, my eyes fixed on the barn door, which was slightly ajar. My mind raced. What was it? Another new evolution? Something I hadn't encountered yet? The thought sent a fresh wave of terror through me. When the infected evolved to hunt, they didn't stop. They kept changing, adapting, becoming more deadly. I withdrew my canteen, slowly, silently. I needed to investigate. I couldn't afford to leave any potential threat unchecked, not if I wanted to reach the sanctuary. And this sound, it was too strange, too new to ignore. I crept toward the barn, my boots crunching softly on the dry earth. The air was thick with the smell of old hay and something else, something metallic and faintly sweet. Blood. The thumping grew louder, more distinct, a dull, rhythmic beat. It sounded like something was methodically hitting a surface. I reached the barn door, my heart hammering. I pushed it open just a crack, peering into the gloom. The interior was vast, filled with shadows and the outlines of old farming equipment. The thumping came from the far corner. My eyes adjusted. I saw it then. Not an infected, not a monster. A man. He was tied to a post, his body slumped, his head hanging low. His clothes were torn, his skin pale. He was clearly injured, but alive. And beside him, on the floor, was a bucket. and a wrench. He was trying to hit the bucket with the wrench, a desperate attempt to create noise, a diversion, a signal. But for whom? Or for what? My mind raced. Was it a trap? Was he trying to draw in infected? Or was he a survivor, desperate for help? The ethical dilemma hit me hard. In this world, trust was a luxury, a weakness that could get you killed. But leaving him, leaving another human to whatever fate awaited him, it felt wrong. It felt like giving up a piece of my own humanity. I looked at the man, then around the barn. No sign of infected, no immediate threat. Yet, the thumping stopped. He must have heard me. His head slowly lifted. His eyes, though weary, were filled with a desperate, primal fear, but also a flicker of hope. He wasn't one of them. He was a survivor, like me. "Help," he croaked, his voice raw, barely a whisper. "Please." The decision was a familiar, agonizing dilemma. Trust or paranoia? Humanity faced extinction, and often it was our own kind who delivered the final blow. I remembered Michael's story, abandoned as bait. I remembered the general ruthlessness of the world. But I also remembered the crushing loneliness, the desperate need for human connection. What would you do? Risk everything for a chance at companionship, or continue alone, clinging to your hardened solitude? I still didn't know the answer. My grip on the machete tightened. Every instinct screamed caution. This world had taught me that extending help often meant extending your own neck. But the raw desperation in his eyes, the sheer humanity of his plea, cut through my ingrained paranoia. He wasn't asking for food or water. He was just asking for freedom. I cautiously stepped into the barn, keeping my distance, my eyes scanning every shadow, every corner. The air here was heavy with a mix of dried hay, old dust, and the unsettling metallic tang I'd come to associate with recent violence. My leg throbbed, a constant reminder of my own vulnerability. "Who are you?" I asked, my voice low, raspy from disuse. "Why are you tied up?" He tried to answer, but it came out as a pained cough. He struggled against the ropes, thin wrists chafing against the rough hemp. They left me, to draw them out." "Who left you?" I pressed, my suspicion flaring. "The infected?" "No," he rasped, shaking his head. "Survivors. A group. They said I was too slow, a liability. They used me as bait." The words hit me hard. It wasn't just the infected that threatened humanity anymore. It was each other. The idea that another group of people would willingly sacrifice one of their own, tie him up, use him as a living lure for the evolving infected, it was a sickening realization. It was just another facet of how humanity faced extinction. We were eating ourselves from the inside out. "Where are they now?" I asked, my voice colder now, wary. He just shook his head, looking utterly defeated. "Gone. Headed north, toward the mountains. Said they heard about a place, a sanctuary." My breath hitched. The sanctuary. My destination. Was this the same rumor? Were these the people who had abandoned him? It seemed likely. The thought of encountering them filled me with a fresh surge of dread. I took a few more cautious steps closer, assessing him. He was thin, dehydrated, with several nasty cuts and bruises. His ankle looked swollen, a dark purple against his pale skin. No bite marks, no signs of infection. He was just a victim, a very unlucky one. The man's eyes, brown and pleading, met mine. "Please, I just need to get free. I can't stay here. They'll be back, the ones I was making noise for." My mind raced. If he was bait, then whatever he was trying to attract must be in the vicinity. And if he had been left here, then his former companions were likely not far, listening, waiting for whatever carnage unfolded. This was a trap within a trap. "What are the ones?" I asked, my voice sharp. "The shamblers? The hunters? The clickers?" He looked confused. "The big ones, fast, like shadows. They come when there's noise, always when there's noise. They call them wraiths." Wraiths. Another new name for a new horror. It confirmed my fears. The evolution of the infected was ongoing, relentless. When the infected evolved to hunt, they adapted to every variable, every tactic. Humanity was fighting a losing battle against a constantly improving enemy. I had to get him free. Not just because it was the right thing to do, but because leaving him here, creating a guaranteed spectacle, would draw every evolved hunter for miles. This farm would become a death trap, and I'd be caught in it. I knelt, machete ready, and carefully began to cut the ropes around his wrists. The hemp was stiff, rough. My hands were still shaking slightly from the encounter with the clickers, and the cut on my arm throbbed. I worked quickly, listening, straining to hear any sound other than the rustle of hay and my own ragged breathing. "What's your name?" I asked, trying to keep my voice even. "Michael," he whispered, his voice gaining a slight strength as the first rope gave way. "Thank you, thank you." I didn't respond, just focused on the ropes. 3 more to go. His ankles, his waist. I had to be fast. I remembered a similar situation from one of my books, a scenario about escaping a hostage situation. Never fully trust, but always provide egress. A strange thought to have in a zombie apocalypse. As the last rope around his waist parted, Michael almost collapsed. His legs, stiff from being tied, buckled. I caught him, supporting his weight. He was surprisingly light, weakened by dehydration and fear. "My ankle," he gasped, pointing to his swollen foot. "I can't walk on it." Damn it, a liability. Just as his former group had said. But I couldn't abandon him now. I'd already committed. "Lean on me," I said, putting his uninjured arm around my shoulders. "We have to move, now. If those wraiths are out there, they'll be coming for the noise." We moved slowly, painfully out of the barn. Each step sent a jolt of pain through Michael's ankle and sent a fresh throb through my own bruised ribs. I winced, biting back a groan. My injured arm was starting to ache even more with the added strain of supporting him. The moment we cleared the barn door, I saw it. A dark, impossibly fast shadow darting across the far edge of the field. No sound, just a blur of movement. A wraith. It was already here. "Run," I hissed at Michael, despite knowing it was a futile command. "Or limp, just move." He tried, a desperate, hobbling shuffle, but his ankle gave out almost immediately. He cried out, collapsing on the dry grass. "Get down!" I shoved him into the tall weeds, crouching beside him, pulling him as deep as I could. The machete was ready. My pistol was drawn. I scanned the field, trying to pinpoint the wraith. The air grew heavy, an almost suffocating stillness that settled over the farm. Even the insects seemed to fall silent. It was the silence of a predator, perfectly still, perfectly hidden, waiting for its moment. I could feel its gaze, a cold, invisible touch on my skin. "They're faster than anything," Michael whispered, his voice trembling. "Like ghosts, you don't see 'em until they're on you." That's when I heard it. Not a sound from the wraith, but a faint, metallic click. From the tree line, on the far side of the field. More clickers. The bait had worked, and now the hunters were converging. My former survival strategies, built on stealth and avoidance, felt utterly useless. I was caught between a fast, silent predator and a pack of intelligent, communicating skirmishers. This wasn't just a fight for my life. This was a microcosm of the larger struggle, humanity facing extinction at the hands of an enemy that relentlessly adapted, that constantly evolved. I looked at Michael, his face pale with terror, then at the tree line, then at the unseen presence of the wraith. My heart hammered, a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I had maybe 3 rounds left in the pistol. The machete was my last resort. "Stay here," I whispered, pushing him deeper into the weeds. "Don't move. Don't make a sound." I had to draw them away, all of them. Give Michael a chance. Give myself a chance. I had to become the bait. But how? What would draw 3 different kinds of evolved infected? My eyes darted to the old farmhouse. Empty, dilapidated, but it had an upstairs.
A bell tower, old and rusted, stood crookedly above the porch. An idea, desperate and probably suicidal, formed in my mind. I took a deep breath, stilling myself. This was it. The moment I either fought for what little humanity was left or succumbed to the overwhelming dread.
What would you do? Would you sacrifice yourself for a stranger, knowing it might be a futile gesture? I still don't know the answer, but I knew one thing. I wasn't going to let them win. Not today. The decision was made, a cold knot of resolve hardening in my gut. Sacrifice was a heavy word, one I hadn't truly considered for myself before. But looking at Michael, a helpless stranger, a discarded piece of humanity, I knew I couldn't just leave him. If this was the end, I would face it fighting, not running, not hiding. I'm going to draw them away, I whispered to Michael, my voice raspy. Stay hidden, don't make a sound, wait for me. If I don't come back. I left the sentence unfinished. There was no need to elaborate. He just nodded, tears tracking paths through the grime on his cheeks. Be careful, he rasped. Please. I didn't answer. There was no time. The clicks from the tree line were growing more insistent, closer. The wraith, though still unseen, had undoubtedly pinpointed our general location. I had to act now. I rose slowly from the weeds, a single target against the vast, overgrown field. My bruised ribs screamed in protest, my injured arm throbbed, and my cut leg burned. But I ignored it all, focusing solely on the farmhouse and the rickety bell tower that jutted from its roof. I broke into a limping run, aiming for the farmhouse. The moment I moved, the clicks from the tree line intensified, a chorus of predatory excitement. The wraiths, too, seemed to respond. I could feel their unseen eyes on me, the chilling sensation of being actively hunted. The farmhouse porch creaked under my weight as I stumbled up the steps. The front door hung open, revealing a dark, silent interior. The air inside was stagnant, thick with dust and the smell of decay. I didn't stop. I ran through the living room, past overturned furniture and broken glass, heading for the stairs. Each step on the old wooden staircase was a precarious gamble. The wood groaned and splintered under my weight, protesting with every ascending foot. My legs screamed with pain, but I pushed through it, adrenaline a potent, brutal fuel. I could hear them now, the quick, scuttling scrabble of the clickers on the dry earth outside, the heavy thuds of the larger hunters, and the unsettling, almost silent rush of the wraiths. They were coming, all of them. I reached the second floor, a narrow hallway lined with closed doors. I didn't waste time. I pushed open a door leading to a small, dusty attic space. A ladder, old and rickety, led up to a trapdoor in the ceiling. Above that, I hoped, was the bell tower. I scrambled up the ladder, my arms burning, my injured one screaming in protest. The trapdoor was jammed, refusing to budge. I slammed my shoulder against it, once, twice, 3 times, until the old wood finally groaned, gave way, and swung upward with a shower of dust and splinters. I pulled myself into the bell tower, blinking against the sudden rush of cool, fresh air. It was a small, open-sided structure, offering a panoramic view of the farm. The bell itself, rusted and verdigris covered, hung silent and still, its clapper a heavy lump of iron. Below me, the farmyard was a nightmare in motion. Dozens of clickers swarmed the fields, their bodies a shimmering wave of gray, all converging on the farmhouse. Larger, hulking figures, the evolved hunters, moved with terrifying speed, clearing obstacles with effortless leaps. And weaving between them, like dark blurs against the fading morning light, were the wraiths, their silent movements the most terrifying of all. They were here, all of them. When the infected evolved to hunt, they truly became the apex predators. My heart hammered against my ribs. This was it, the moment of truth. I grabbed the thick, rotted rope that hung from the bell. It was stiff, abrasive, covered in years of grime. I pulled, testing its strength. It held. With a deep breath, I put all my weight into it, pulling hard. The rusted bell groaned, then swung, slowly at first, then faster.
The heavy iron clapper slammed against the bronze, emitting a single deafening dong that reverberated across the farm, echoing through the desolate landscape. The effect was instantaneous. Every infected creature in the field, every shambler, every clicker, every hunter, every wraith froze. Their heads snapped up, their black eyes fixing on the bell tower. The noise, so loud, so jarring, had seized their attention. Then they surged. A tide of gray and black, a cacophony of groans, clicks, and guttural snarls, all rushing toward the farmhouse. I kept pulling the rope, the dong, dong, dong of the bell, a relentless, desperate siren. The first of the clickers reached the porch, scrambling up the steps with alarming speed. Then the larger hunters. I could hear their thuds and snarls from below, tearing through the farmhouse, making their way up the stairs. The wraiths, silent as ever, probably already inside. I knew my time was limited. This bell, this noise, was a beacon. It was drawing them to me, away from Michael. That was the plan, but now I had to survive it. I dropped the rope, pulling out my pistol. 2 rounds left. 2. Against a whole legion of evolved monsters. It was suicide. But I had a machete. I had my will to survive. And I had Sarah's face in my mind, a burning ember against the encroaching darkness. The floor below me groaned, a tearing sound. They were in the attic. Seconds, maybe a minute. My eyes scanned the horizon. The distant mountains, a hazy blue against the morning sky. The sanctuary. Was it real? Was there truly a place where humanity could rebuild, where we weren't just prey? The thought was a fragile thread, but I clung to it. A clawed hand burst through the trapdoor, followed by a pale, elongated head. A clicker. Its black eyes fixed on me, its mouth clicking with frenzied hunger. Its body, thin and agile, began to squeeze through the opening. I fired the pistol. Once. The shot struck it in the head. It shrieked, twitching, then fell back through the trapdoor, a wet thud echoing from below. 1 round left. 1. More sounds, more bodies, pushing at the trapdoor from below. It splintered further, groaning under the weight. They were trying to force their way in. I raised the pistol, aimed it at the trapdoor. My last bullet. I closed my eyes for a fraction of a second, picturing Sarah, her smile, her trust. Then I opened them. My face was grim, determined. I wasn't going to just let them have me. I would fight. To the last breath. To the last bullet. The trapdoor burst open with a crash, sending splinters flying. 3 clickers swarmed into the bell tower, their black eyes blazing with hunger, their mouths clicking furiously. Behind them, I saw the distorted, shadowy forms of the wraiths, silently flowing into the attic. And beyond them, the hulking shapes of the evolved hunters. My last bullet. The choice was mine. Kill one or save it for myself. In this world, the line between living and dying was razor thin, constantly blurred by desperation. What would you do when facing an overwhelming horde with only 1 round left? I still don't know if I made the right choice, but I raised the pistol, and I fired. The sound was deafening, final. The first clicker dropped, its head a mess of gray flesh and black fluid. 1 down. 2 more immediately lunged at me. I dropped the empty pistol, grabbing my machete. The blade, heavy and sharp, felt like an extension of my arm. "Come on, you bastards," I screamed, a raw, primal roar of defiance. Humanity faced extinction, but not like this. I swung the machete, a desperate, wide arc that caught one of the clickers across the torso, nearly severing it in half. It shrieked, convulsing, falling to the floor. The other one, faster, smarter, darted under my swing, its claws raking across my chest. A searing pain. I felt blood blossom across my shirt. But I didn't stop. I spun, bringing the machete back around, catching it in the head. It dropped. 3 more immediately poured through the trapdoor. Wraiths. They were silent, shadowy blurs, impossibly fast. I barely had time to react.
One was on me in an instant, its long skeletal fingers closing around my throat, squeezing, cutting off my air. Its face, a pale, distorted mask of hunger, was inches from mine. I gasped, clawing at its hands, trying to dislodge its grip. My vision began to narrow, darkness creeping in at the edges. The machete was still in my hand, but I couldn't bring it to bear. Its grip was too strong. I felt myself weakening, my muscles failing. This was it. The end. Michael, Sarah, the sanctuary, all of it fading into a black void. Then a sudden, blinding flash of light, a deafening roar. The wraith pinning me shrieked, staggering back, releasing its grip. I gasped, sucking in a painful breath, my hand instinctively reaching for my throat. I looked up. A helicopter, a military helicopter, low and fast, was hovering over the farm, its searchlight piercing the gloom. And beneath it, a torrent of automatic gunfire erupted, stitching bright lines of death across the farmyard. They weren't here to save me. They were here to sanitize, to destroy. The infected below, caught in the open, were being mowed down by the dozens. Clickers, hunters, wraiths, all of them falling under the relentless fire. But more were still coming, pouring into the farm, drawn by the bell, by the gunfire, by the sheer chaos. The helicopter searchlight swept over the bell tower, blinding me. I shielded my eyes, but in that moment, I saw it. The distant mountains, the faint promise of the sanctuary. It was still there, still within reach. The helicopter continued its relentless assault, its rotors beating a thunderous rhythm that shook the entire bell tower. This wasn't salvation. This was just another, more devastating way that humanity faced extinction, bombing us all into oblivion to contain the uncontainable. I had to move, now, before they bombed the bell tower, before the infected swarmed the tower, before it all collapsed. Michael. I had to get back to Michael. He was still hidden, still waiting. I gripped my machete, my body screaming in protest, and looked out at the chaos below. The bell tower groaned, swaying ominously. My path to Michael, my path to the sanctuary, was more dangerous than ever. The world wasn't ending with a whimper, but with a terrifying, apocalyptic roar of gunshots and helicopter blades. And I was right in the middle of it all. What would you do? Would you give up, or would you fight through one last, desperate wave of hell? I didn't know, but I knew one thing. I wasn't going to let them win. Not yet. The air was thick with the smell of gunpowder, burning fuel, and the pervasive metallic tang of blood. The helicopter, a monstrous black silhouette against the bruised morning sky, continued its relentless assault, its searchlight sweeping across the farmyard like a vengeful god. What would you do? Would you give up, or would you fight through one last, desperate wave of hell? I didn't know. But I knew one thing. I wasn't going to let them win. Not yet. The air was thick with the smell of gunpowder, burning fuel, and the pervasive metallic tang of blood. The helicopter, a monstrous black silhouette against the bruised morning sky, continued its relentless assault, its searchlight sweeping across the farmyard like a vengeful god. The stuttering roar of its guns was deafening, punctuated by the high-pitched shrieks and guttural gurgles of the dying infected. This wasn't containment. This was pure, unadulterated annihilation, and I was caught in the middle. The bell tower groaned, swaying precariously under the constant vibrations of the helicopter's rotors and the impacts of whatever was tearing through the farmhouse below. Splinters of wood rained down from the ceiling. I could feel the structure weakening, ready to give way at any moment. I had to get out. Michael, he was still in the weeds, hidden, but for how long? If the military leveled the entire farm, he would be buried, or worse, left to whatever evolved horrors survived the bombardment. My eyes darted to the shattered opening where the trap door had been. Below, the attic was a swirling mass of shadowy forms. Clickers, hunters, and the silent, terrifying wraiths were still pushing in, drawn by the sound, the movement, the scent of life. The helicopter was killing them, yes, but not fast enough. More were still coming, a relentless, undulating tide. I gripped my machete, my mind racing. There was no going back down the way I came. The ladder was probably destroyed, and even if it wasn't, the attic was a death trap. My only option was outside, the roof. I scrambled to the edge of the bell tower, peering over. The roof of the farmhouse was steep, covered in brittle, cracked shingles. A long drop, maybe 20 feet, to the ground below. A dangerous jump, but a possible one. Better than being consumed by the infected or vaporized by military ordnance. Taking a deep, shaky breath, I launched myself off the tower, landing hard on the steep pitch of the roof. My boots scrambled for purchase, sending a shower of loose shingles skittering down into the chaos below. I slid, a desperate, uncontrolled tumble, until my fingers found purchase on the edge of a sturdy-looking chimney. My arms screamed in protest, threatening to give out, but I held on, knuckles white, breath hitched. The helicopter searchlight swung toward me, briefly illuminating my terrified face before sweeping past. The rhythmic chatter of its guns intensified, focusing on a particularly dense cluster of infected near the barn. Michael. I had to get to Michael. I clambered down the roof, moving with desperate speed, my injured legs screaming with every jarring step. Loose shingles broke beneath my weight, making the descent even more treacherous. My goal was the far side of the farmhouse, away from the brunt of the military's attack, where the tall weeds would offer cover for Michael. I reached the eaves, then dropped the remaining 10 feet to the ground, landing with a jarring thud that sent a fresh jolt of pain through my ribs. I rolled, trying to absorb the impact, then scrambled to my feet, machete ready. The farmyard was a scene of utter carnage. Infected bodies, mangled and twitching, lay scattered across the fields. The air vibrated with the roar of the helicopter and the sounds of its victims. More were still arriving, a never-ending stream, drawn to the relentless noise and the scent of death. When the infected evolved to hunt, they became a force of nature, an unstoppable wave of predation. Humanity faced extinction, not just from the bite, but from the sheer, overwhelming numbers and the ruthlessness of the countermeasures. "Michael!" I yelled, my voice hoarse, barely audible above the din. "Michael, where are you?" No answer. My heart clenched with fear. Had he been caught in the crossfire? Had a stray wraith found him? I scrambled into the ditch, collapsing beside him. He was pale, shaking, but alive. A deep cut bled freely on his forehead, probably from a piece of shrapnel, but no bite. Thank God. "We have to go," I gasped, helping him up. "Now, before they drop bombs." He nodded, his eyes wide with terror. "The helicopter, it was so close. I thought they were going to get me." I helped him hobble out of the ditch, supporting his weight. His ankle was still useless, his steps agonizingly slow. We were a glaring target, two limping humans in a landscape of death and fire. "Where are we going?" he asked, his voice weak. "North," I said, my gaze fixed on the hazy outline of the mountains. "To the sanctuary. It's our only chance." We moved as fast as we could, keeping to the edge of the farm, using the sporadic cover of trees and overgrown fences. The helicopter's focus was still on the denser clusters of infected, but its searchlight occasionally swept over our position, sending jolts of panic through me. Each sweep felt like a personal accusation, a spotlight on our desperate, defiant existence. The sounds of the battle slowly began to recede as we put more distance between ourselves and the farm. The gunshots became more sporadic, the helicopter's roar a distant hum. But the fear remained, a cold, persistent knot in my stomach. The military wasn't saving us. They were just leveling the playing field, making sure that what they couldn't control, they would destroy. We reached a small, forgotten dirt road, winding its way deeper into the foothills.
The trees here were thicker, offering better cover, a brief respite from the relentless gaze of the sky. Michael leaned heavily on me, his breathing ragged. "Do you really think this sanctuary is real?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. "Or just a story?" I looked at him, at the desperation in his eyes, a mirror of my own. I thought of Sarah, of her unwavering optimism, of the countless lives extinguished in the blink of an eye, of the terrifying, relentless evolution of the infected, proving time and again that our fight was futile. Humanity faced extinction. This was undeniable. But what was hope if not a desperate story we told ourselves to keep going? "I don't know," I admitted, my voice rough. "But it's all we have left, and as long as we have that, we keep going." He nodded slowly, a single tear tracing a clean path through the dirt on his cheek. "Thank you," he said, "for not leaving me." We walked in silence for a long time. The only sounds are ragged breaths and the rustle of leaves underfoot. The sun was rising higher now, beginning to burn off the morning mist, illuminating the path ahead. The mountains loomed larger, a promise, or perhaps just a cruel mirage. My own injuries ached, my body screamed for rest, but the image of that helicopter, that relentless cleansing fire, spurred me on. The world was still a death trap, but now there was a small, fragile connection between two survivors, clinging to a desperate hope. We were moving towards the sanctuary, towards an unknown future. But the question remained, echoing in the silence of the wilderness. When the infected evolved to hunt and humanity faced extinction, could two wounded souls truly make a difference? Could we find a place of safety, or would we just be running into another, more sophisticated trap? I looked at Michael, at his tired but determined face. We still didn't know the answer, but we were going to find out, together. The dirt road stretched endlessly before us, disappearing into the dense, silent forest. We were walking into the unknown, leaving behind the wreckage of the old world and the terrifying brutality of the new. The last echoes of the helicopter's roar faded into the distance. All that was left was the forest, the silence, and the chilling thought that perhaps the greatest challenges still lay ahead. What new horrors would these evolved infected unleash upon the last vestiges of humanity? I had a feeling we were about to find out. The return to the farm felt like stepping into a fresh nightmare. The air was acrid with the lingering smell of smoke and burnt flesh, a horrifying testament to the military's containment efforts. Twisted metal, charred timbers, and the grotesque half-burnt bodies of infected littered the fields. The silence, broken only by the crackle of distant embers and the occasional mournful creak of a cooling structure, was more unsettling than any scream. It was the silence of utter devastation. Michael gasped, pulling back slightly as we rounded the bend and the full horror of the farm came into view. His face was pale, his eyes wide with shock. "My God," he whispered, They really leveled it." I nodded, my own stomach churning. This wasn't just a battleground. It was a mass grave, a grim reminder of how brutally humanity faced extinction, not just at the hands of the infected, but at our own. The military, in their desperation, had wrought more destruction than the evolved monsters themselves. We moved cautiously, eyes scanning the charred landscape. The helicopter was gone. The immediate threat of aerial bombardment had passed, but that didn't mean it was safe. Straggling infected, perhaps even a few of the faster evolved ones, could still be lurking, drawn by the residual chaos and the lingering scent of death. "We're looking for anything with wheels," I said, my voice low. "A wheelbarrow, a wagon, anything we can use to carry you." Michael, still leaning heavily on me, pointed to a section of the barn that had been less severely damaged. Maybe inside there? My group left some tools." We hobbled toward the remnants of the barn. The heat from the still smoldering timbers radiated outwards, making the air shimmer. I could hear the faint, sickening sizzle of flesh. My chest felt tight, a suffocating pressure. This was the landscape of our future, a wasteland of ash and despair. The surviving section of the barn was a wreck, but relatively intact. Dust and soot covered everything, giving it a ghostly pallor. Tools lay scattered on the ground, shovels, rakes, axes, all covered in a fine layer of ash. "Look!" Michael exclaimed, pointing with a shaky finger. "Over there, under that tarp." My eyes followed his gaze. Partially obscured by a soot-stained tarp was an old, rusted garden cart. It had 2 wheels, a wooden frame, and a surprisingly intact bed. It was rickety, probably wouldn't last long, but it was perfect. It was our only hope. I rushed towards it, pulling back the tarp. The cart groaned as I moved it, its wheels squeaking in protest. It was heavy, but manageable. I quickly checked the wheels. They spun freely. The frame, though old, felt sturdy enough. A miracle. "This is it," I said, a surge of desperate hope rising in my chest. "This will get us to the sanctuary." I helped Michael into the cart, making him as comfortable as possible. He winced with every movement, but once settled, a flicker of relief crossed his face. "Thank you," he whispered. I thought I was done for." "Not yet," I said, my voice grim. "We're not done yet." I grabbed the handle of the cart, adjusting my grip. My arms still ached, my ribs throbbed, but the cart made the weight of Michael's body more manageable. We had a chance, a fragile, desperate chance. As I turned the cart, preparing to leave the ruined farm, I heard it. A faint click. From behind a charred oak tree, its branches skeletal against the sky, my blood ran cold. One of them had survived, or more. I froze, machete held ready, my eyes scanning the shadows. Michael gripped the sides of the cart, his breath hitched in his throat. The clicking came again, closer this time, accompanied by a low, guttural growl. Not just a clicker, an evolved hunter, and it was moving. "Stay still," I whispered to Michael. "Don't make a sound." I could see it now, a shadowy blur, darting between the burnt husks of trees. It was smaller than the one I'd killed in the cave, but still gaunt, still terrifyingly fast. Its black eyes fixed on us, its elongated jaw working furiously. It was hunting, and we were exposed. The cart was an advantage, yes, but it also made me slower, less agile. And Michael was a sitting target. We couldn't outrun it. We had to fight. "When the infected evolved to hunt," I whispered, the words a bitter oath, "they taught us to never let our guard down." It charged. Not a straight sprint, but a zigzagging, intelligent rush, weaving between the debris, making itself a difficult target. It was fast, too fast. I pushed the cart behind me, using it as a momentary shield, then lunged forward, machete held high. I aimed for its head, a desperate preemptive strike. The hunter, surprisingly agile, dodged, its head snapping back, its claws raking at my arm. I felt a searing pain as its sharp digits tore a shallow cut across my already injured forearm. I spun, gritting my teeth, ignoring the pain, bringing the machete back in a wide, sweeping arc. It struck the hunter across the torso, but the blow was glancing, barely slowing it. It shrieked, a furious, high-pitched sound, but continued its attack. "Alex," Michael cried out, his voice filled with terror, "it's too fast." He was right. My exhaustion, my injuries, were making me slow. I was barely keeping up. This was it, the moment I finally succumbed to the overwhelming, relentless pressure. Humanity faced extinction, and I was just another statistic. Then, an idea. A desperate, insane gamble. I remembered the still smoldering timbers of the barn, the embers glowing red-hot beneath the ash. Fire. Fire was a weapon. Fire was a deterrent. I dodged another lunge from the hunter, stumbling backward, maneuvering it closer to a pile of smoldering wreckage.
It shrieked, its eyes blazing with hunger, completely focused on me, oblivious to its surroundings. "Michael," I yelled, "get ready to move as fast as you can." He nodded, fear and understanding in his eyes. He grasped the sides of the cart, preparing to push himself away. I waited, baiting the hunter, letting it get closer to the smoldering pile. It lunged again, a furious, desperate assault. This was my moment.
I feigned to dodge. Then, instead of pulling back, I charged forward, meeting its lunge head-on. The hunter was surprised. I didn't aim for its head. I aimed for its legs, a low, brutal sweep of the machete. The blade connected, shearing through muscle and tendon. The hunter screamed, its legs collapsing beneath it. It fell, twisting, landing directly in the smoldering embers. A searing sizzle. The smell of burning flesh intensified, a horrifying stench. The hunter shrieked, not with hunger now, but with agony. It thrashed, its body convulsing, trying to pull itself out of the burning embers, but its legs were useless. The fire took hold, quickly consuming its decaying flesh, turning it into a grotesque burning torch. I didn't wait. "Go," I yelled to Michael, grabbing the cart handle. "Now!" We moved, as fast as my battered body could push us, away from the burning hunter, away from the ruined farm, away from the lingering horror. The shriek of the burning creature faded behind us, replaced by the rhythmic squeak of the cart's wheels and our own ragged breathing. We reached the dirt road, the forest again closing in around us. The sanctuary. It was still there, still our only hope. I glanced at Michael, his face still pale, but a flicker of grim determination in his eyes. He had seen the worst, and he was still here, still fighting. We were two survivors, a broken piece of humanity, pushing a rickety cart through a world that wanted us dead. The sun began its descent once more, painting the sky in fiery hues, a prelude to the dangerous night. What awaited us in the silent, unforgiving wilderness? What new evolutions had the infected undergone, designed to hunt the last vestiges of mankind? I didn't know, but as long as we had each other, as long as we had hope, we would keep pushing. We would keep fighting. Humanity faced extinction, yes, but we weren't giving up. Not yet. Not while we could still breathe. Not while we could still push this cart, one agonizing mile at a time, toward an uncertain future. The road ahead was dark, winding, and unforgiving. The silence of the forest was both a comfort and a terrifying unknown. But as long as we were still moving, there was still a chance. And that chance was all we had left. The old dirt road wound deeper into the mountains, each turn revealing a more secluded, wilder landscape. The trees grew taller, denser, their branches intertwined overhead, forming a perpetual twilight even in the middle of the day. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of pine and damp earth, a welcome change from the smoke and decay of the farm. But the beauty was deceptive. This wilderness was no less dangerous than the city. Here, the evolved infected were truly in their element, masters of stealth and ambush. Michael was hunched in the cart, his face etched with pain, but his eyes were constantly scanning the tree line, alert, watchful. We rarely spoke, conserving our energy, communicating mostly through gestures and glances. The rhythmic squeak of the cart's wheels became a constant companion, a small, defiant sound against the oppressive silence of the forest. Days blurred into a monotonous cycle of relentless pushing, desperate scavenging, and terrifying encounters. My body was a tapestry of aches and strains. My arm throbbed, my ribs screamed, and my leg was a dull, persistent ache. But a strange kind of resilience had settled into my bones. Each step, each breath was a small victory. We encountered clickers several times. Their high-pitched sounds echoing through the trees would send a jolt of terror through me, forcing me to push the cart faster, seeking cover. We learned to anticipate their movements, to spot their faint, agile forms darting through the undergrowth. We lost a few meager supplies in a desperate scramble to escape a pack once, but we escaped. Survival was paramount.
The wraiths were the worst. Silent, almost invisible, they were truly the ghosts of this new world. I would only catch a fleeting glimpse, a blur of shadow, a shift in the air, before they vanished. Their presence was a constant, chilling reminder that we were never truly safe, that at any moment one could burst from the shadows, striking with impossible speed. We survived those encounters through sheer luck and by moving constantly, never staying in one place for too long. Food and water became our primary concerns. We rationed strictly, each mouthful, each sip, a conscious effort to prolong our journey. We learned to identify edible berries and roots, a desperate knowledge acquired through grim necessity and the lingering, distant memory of old survival guides. Michael, surprisingly, had a decent knowledge of foraging, a skill he'd picked up from his father on camping trips years ago. It was a small, unexpected gift, a reminder that even in this apocalypse, human knowledge, human ingenuity could still find a way. My dad, Michael had whispered one evening as we shared a few foraged mushrooms cooked over a tiny, carefully concealed fire. He loved these mountains, said they held all the secrets of life. His eyes had been distant, filled with memory. He'd be furious if he saw what they've done to them. I understood. I thought of Sarah, of her love for wildflowers. This world was a desecration, a horror that stained every beautiful memory. When the infected evolved to hunt, they didn't just target us. They targeted everything we held dear, every piece of our humanity, slowly eroding it, leaving only a barren wasteland of fear and survival. As we pushed deeper into the mountains, the rumors of the sanctuary grew stronger, more specific. Whispers from the few abandoned settlements we found spoke of a fortified research facility high in the remote peaks, a place where scientists had been working on an airborne counteragent designed to neutralize the infected virus. Some called it Project Chimera. Others simply called it the Last Hope. It was hundreds of miles behind enemy lines, through treacherous, infested territory, but it was humanity's last, desperate gamble, our last chance to prevent extinction. The terrain became increasingly difficult. The dirt path gave way to rocky trails, then to no trail at all. I was pushing the cart up steep inclines, navigating treacherous descents, my muscles burning, my lungs aching. Michael, despite his pain, tried to help, using his good leg to push when he could, offering directions from the cart. His resolve was growing, hardening with each passing day. He was no longer just a victim, he was a survivor. One afternoon, as we rounded a particularly dense thicket of trees, we saw it. A clearing, and in the center, a small, derelict cabin. Not the hunting cabin we'd left, but another, smaller, more isolated structure. And smoke, a faint wisp of smoke curling lazily from its chimney. My heart leaped. Other survivors. It was a terrifying thought, filled with both hope and dread. Hope for help, for answers, for companionship. Dread for betrayal, for violence, for the harsh reality that not all survivors were good. Michael gripped the sides of the cart, his eyes wide. Do we approach?" he whispered. The choice was a familiar, agonizing dilemma. Trust or paranoia? Humanity faced extinction, yes, but often it was our own kind who delivered the final blow. I remembered Michael's story, abandoned as bait. I remembered the general ruthlessness of the world. But I also remembered the crushing loneliness, the desperate need for human connection. What would you do? Risk everything for a chance at companionship, or continue alone, clinging to your hardened solitude? I still didn't know the answer. I took a deep breath. "Carefully," I said, my voice low. "We approach carefully, see who they are, what their intentions are." We left the cart hidden in the thick undergrowth, Michael waiting nervously. I moved forward alone, machete ready, pistol drawn but hidden. Every step was deliberate, silent. I approached the cabin from the side, using the trees as cover, my eyes scanning for any sign of movement, any tripwires, any sentries. The cabin was small, rustic. Smoke continued to curl from its chimney, a comforting sign of life. A single window, covered with grimy plastic sheeting, faced away from me.
I crept closer, pressing myself against the rough log wall, trying to hear anything from within. Faint voices, low, murmuring, too indistinct to make out words, but definitely human. And then a smell. Not decay, not smoke, but cooking. The faint, undeniable aroma of sizzling meat, real meat. My stomach growled, a painful rumble that seemed deafening in the silence. I moved to the front of the cabin, still hidden by a cluster of thick bushes. The front door was solid, made of heavy planks, and a faint glow emanated from the cracks around it. I listened harder. "Heard the chopper," a deep voice said, clearer now. "They're still hitting the cities. Probably containment. Means we're safe for a little longer." "Don't get too comfortable, Silas," another, softer voice replied, a woman. "Nothing's safe, not with those things getting smarter and faster." My heart hammered against my ribs. They knew. They understood the evolution. They understood the true nature of the threat. When the infected evolved to hunt, some still saw the danger, recognized it. "Yeah, well," Silas grumbled, "at least the big ones are distracted. Gives us a chance to finally make it to the facility. The last hope." The sanctuary. They were headed there, too. This was it, a direct connection. I stepped out from behind the bushes, my machete held loosely at my side, my pistol still hidden. My voice, rough and raspy, cut through the quiet. "Excuse me," I said. "I didn't mean to startle you. My name's Alex. I'm a survivor, and I think we're going to the same place." Silence. The murmuring inside the cabin ceased immediately. Then, the distinct, chilling click of a shotgun being cocked. "Show yourself," the deep voice, Silas, bellowed. "Hands where I can see 'em." I raised my hand slowly, making sure my hidden pistol remained hidden. "I'm unarmed," I said, a deliberate lie. "Just me and another survivor. He's injured. We just need to know if you're friendly, and if you have any information about the Last Hope facility." The door creaked open a crack. A single wary eye peered out. Then, a shotgun barrel, glinting dully in the fading light, emerged, followed by a large, burly man, Silas. He was rugged, his face weathered, his eyes hard and suspicious. Behind him, a woman, older, her face lined with weariness, held a smaller pistol. "Another survivor, eh?" Silas said, his voice laced with suspicion. "You got a name for that injured friend of yours?" "Michael," I said. "He was abandoned by his last group, left as bait." Silas's eyes narrowed, a flicker of understanding, perhaps even disgust, crossing his face. He knew about that kind of ruthlessness. He'd seen it. Humanity faced extinction, and in its dying throes, it revealed its true, brutal nature. "All right," he said after a long, tense moment. "Come inside. Slow, and no tricks, or this shotgun's gonna have a very bad day." I nodded, my heart pounding, a mixture of relief and extreme caution. We were inside. For better or worse, we had made contact. The sanctuary was closer than ever, but so were the dangers of human nature. What new challenges awaited us now that we were no longer alone? I still didn't know, but I knew one thing. This was a chance, and in this world, a chance was all you could ever ask for. The smell of cooking meat, now stronger, filled the air, a tantalizing scent of something almost forgotten. The cabin offered warmth, food, and human contact. But beneath it all, the ever-present threat of the evolved infected and the chilling reality of human betrayal still lurked. This was not a haven, merely another stop on a desperate journey, another fragile moment where hope and dread intertwined. And as the door closed behind me, shutting out the encroaching darkness, I wondered if this fragile alliance would last until dawn. The small cabin was warm, almost stifling,
a stark contrast to the cold dread of the outside world. The tantalizing aroma of venison stew, bubbling gently in a pot over a small crackling fire, filled the air, a scent so primal and comforting it almost brought tears to my eyes. It had been so long since I'd smelled anything but decay and fear. Silas, the burly man with the shotgun, watched my every move as I entered, his eyes never leaving me. The woman, who introduced herself as Lena, stood beside him, her pistol held steady, her gaze weary but watchful. They were hardened survivors, their faces etched with the harsh realities of this new world. "All right, Alex," Silas said, his voice still gruff, but a hint of curiosity now. "Where's this injured friend of yours?" I explained Michael's situation, his sprained ankle, the garden cart. Silas grunted, then nodded to Lena. "Go with him, Lena. See if the kid's worth the risk." Lena, after a moment's hesitation, nodded and followed me out. The tension in the cabin, though unspoken, was palpable. They were weighing us, assessing our worth, our potential threat. We retrieved Michael, Lena's eyes widening slightly at the sight of the cart and Michael's pale, pained face. She examined his ankle with a knowing glance. "That's a nasty one," she said, her voice surprisingly gentle. "He won't be walking on that for a while." Back in the cabin, the atmosphere softened slightly. The shared meal, simple venison stew with foraged roots, was a small act of communion, a fragile bridge built over the chasm of suspicion. Michael, despite his pain, ate ravenously, his eyes tearing up with gratitude. It was a tangible piece of humanity in a world starved of it. Silas, the burly man with the shotgun, watched my every move as I entered, his eyes never leaving me. The woman, who introduced herself as Lena, stood beside him, her pistol held steady, her gaze weary but watchful. They were hardened survivors, their faces etched with the harsh realities of this new world. "All right, Alex," Silas said, his voice still gruff, but a hint of curiosity now. "Where's this injured friend of yours?" I explained Michael's situation, his sprained ankle, the garden cart. Silas grunted, then nodded to Lena. "Go with him, Lena. See if the kid's worth the risk." Lena, after a moment's hesitation, nodded and followed me out. The tension in the cabin, though unspoken, was palpable. They were weighing us, assessing our worth, our potential threat. We retrieved Michael, Lena's eyes widening slightly at the sight of the cart and Michael's pale, pained face. She examined his ankle with a knowing glance. "That's a nasty one," she said, her voice surprisingly gentle. "He won't be walking on that for a while." Back in the cabin, the atmosphere softened slightly. The shared meal, simple venison stew with foraged roots, was a small act of communion, a fragile bridge built over the chasm of suspicion. Michael, despite his pain, ate ravenously, his eyes tearing up with gratitude. It was a tangible piece of humanity in a world starved of it. Over the stew, we exchanged stories, fragmented pieces of our shattered lives. Silas and Lena had been part of a larger group, a family unit, until a clicker pack backed by a wraith ambushed them near a river crossing. They were the only two left. Their grim faces and the way their hands trembled when they spoke of it painted a vivid, horrifying picture of the battle. They knew intimately when the infected evolved to hunt. "The wraiths," Silas said, his voice low, "they're the worst. Silent as death, and smart. They coordinate with the clickers, use them to draw you out, then they move in for the kill." "We call them shadows," Lena added, her voice a quiet shiver, "because that's all you see until they're on you." They had heard the same rumors about Project Chimera, the Last Hope, a research facility high in the remote peaks of these mountains. A place where scientists had allegedly been working on an airborne counteragent designed to neutralize the infected virus. It was a desperate, impossible dream, but it was the only one they had left. The only hope against humanity facing extinction. "We were almost there," Lena said, her gaze distant. "Just a few more days, we think." But the terrain gets rougher, and the farther north you go, the denser the populations of the evolved ones become. Like they're guarding something. Her words sent a chill down my spine. Guarding something. The facility. Was it a natural barrier, or were they somehow drawn to it? Did the infected, in their terrifying evolution, possess an instinctual need to protect the very source of their creation? Or perhaps to prevent a cure? The thought was unsettling, hinting at a level of intelligence far beyond mere predation. We spent the night in the cabin, a fitful sleep interrupted by the sounds of the forest, wind rustling through the trees, the distant cries of night animals. But no infected. For a few precious hours, we were safe, a fragile bubble of peace in a world that was anything but. The next morning, the reality of our situation pressed in. Michael's ankle was no better. We needed to keep moving. Silas, after much deliberation, agreed to let us travel with him, not out of altruism, but out of practicality. 4 people were stronger than 2, and a cart, though slow, meant we could carry more supplies, rotate who pushed. A fragile alliance, born of desperate necessity. But no slowing us down, Silas warned, his eyes hard. If he can't keep up, we leave him, no questions asked. This ain't a charity trip, Alex. This is about survival, our survival. His words were brutal, but honest. I understood. In this world, sentiment was a luxury few could afford. Humanity faced extinction, and the harsh calculus of survival demanded ruthless choices. What would you do when forced to choose between a friend and your own survival? I had a feeling I would have to make that choice again and again before this journey was over. We set out as the sun climbed higher, casting dappled light through the dense canopy. I pushed the cart, Michael inside, while Silas led the way, shotgun ready, his eyes constantly sweeping the tree line. Lena brought up the rear, her pistol held steady. We were a small, desperate caravan, moving through a hostile world, clinging to a single, impossible hope. The terrain grew steeper, the forest denser. We moved slower now, the cart a heavy burden up the inclines. Michael, despite his pain, tried to help, pushing with his good leg, but his pain was evident. I could see the frustration in Silas's face, the constant calculation of risk versus reward. Then we heard it. Not clicks, not growls. A strange, resonant sound, almost like a buzzing. It came from the ridge above us, a high-pitched, vibrating hum that made the very air thrum. Silas froze, shotgun rising. Lena gasped, her face pale. My blood ran cold. This was new. This was different. Another evolution. "What is that?" Michael whispered, his voice trembling. Silas shook his head, his eyes wide with fear. Never heard anything like it, not from them. The buzzing intensified, a low, throbbing hum that seemed to vibrate in my chest. And then a dark shape detached itself from the ridge, soaring into the sky. It was large, beetle-like, with membranous wings that beat with a terrifying rhythmic thrum. Its body was elongated, chitinous, and its head was a grotesque nightmare of multifaceted eyes and sharp, serrated mouthparts. It hovered above us, silhouetted against the pale sky, its buzzing growing louder, more menacing. "Flyers," Lena whispered, her voice a horrified gasp. "They've evolved to fly." My heart plummeted, my blood turned to ice. This was it. The final, insurmountable hurdle. When the infected evolved to hunt, they took to the skies. There was truly nowhere left to hide. Humanity faced extinction. This was no longer a question of if, but when. The flyer descended, its buzzing growing into a roar, its shadow passing over us like a death omen. Silas raised his shotgun, firing a desperate shot. But the pellets simply pinged off its chitinous hide, doing nothing. Lena fired her pistol, equally futile. The flyer swooped low, its shadow engulfing us. My eyes darted to Michael, trapped in the cart, his face a mask of terror. This was the end,
The final, terrifying evolution. What could we possibly do against something that could hunt us from the sky? The flyer let out a piercing shriek, a sound that seemed to tear through the very fabric of the air, and descended, its sharp, serrated mouthparts opening wide, aiming directly for us. There was no escape. There was no hope. This was it, the end of the line, the final, crushing blow, the last breath of humanity. What would you do when facing an enemy that evolved beyond all comprehension from both land and sky? I still didn't have the answer, but I knew one thing: I wasn't going to let it be for nothing.
Its shadow, vast and menacing, engulfed us as it plummeted from the sky, its grotesque mouthparts wide, revealing rows of serrated teeth. Despair, cold and absolute, threatened to consume me. This was it, the final, insurmountable evolution. How could humanity face extinction when its enemies had taken to the very air? Silas, with a guttural roar, instinctively lunged forward, pushing the cart, pushing Michael behind him. Lena raised her pistol, firing wildly, the small rounds pinging off the flyer's chitinous armor with useless futility. My own machete felt impossibly light, utterly inadequate against something so alien, so powerful. The flyer hit the ground with a sickening thud, a few feet in front of Silas, sending up a shower of dirt and debris. It was massive, easily twice the size of a man, its insectoid body quivering with predatory hunger. Its multifaceted eyes, black and lifeless, swiveled, fixing on us. It wasn't just a beast, it was a grotesque killing machine, perfected by some horrifying, accelerated evolutionary process. Silas fired his shotgun, point blank, directly into its head. The blast was deafening, tearing a ragged hole in its chitin. The flyer shrieked, a sound of fury and pain, stumbling backward for a moment. Black, viscous fluid oozed from the wound. But it didn't fall, it wasn't dead. Its head snapped up, those terrible eyes blazing with renewed rage, and it lunged at Silas. Silas, bless his defiant heart, stood his ground, trying to pump another shell into a shotgun, but he was too slow. The flyer was on him in an instant, its serrated maw closing around his shoulder with a wet, tearing sound. Silas screamed, a raw, primal sound of agony. "Silas!" Lena screamed, firing her pistol again, uselessly. I didn't think, I reacted. My machete was a blur, a desperate arc aimed at the flyer's exposed flank, where its wings joined its body. The blade bit deep, tearing through flesh and membrane. The flyer shrieked again, a high-pitched wail, releasing Silas, staggering back, its vast wing now mangled and useless. But it wasn't defeated. It turned its terrible gaze on me, its buzzing intensifying into a furious roar. It was grounded now, but still lethal. And it was focused. Silas crumpled to the ground, clutching his shoulder, blood pumping freely from the terrible wound. Lena rushed to his side, her face a mask of horror. Michael, trapped in the cart, could only watch, his face ashen. I was alone, facing this monstrous, evolved flyer. My machete, slick with its black blood, felt like my only friend. This was the ultimate test. This was why humanity faced extinction. An enemy that relentlessly adapted, growing stronger, faster, more terrifying with each passing day. The flyer charged, its movements clumsy now, but still powerful, its remaining wing beating furiously, stirring up dust and leaves. It was coming for me, its mouthparts gnashing, its black eyes burning with murder. I remembered the clickers, their vulnerability to light. The larger hunters, their weak spot, the head. This flyer, its chitinous armor made it tough, but its wings were its advantage, and now its weakness. If I could disable the other one, ground it completely. I dodged its first clumsy lunge, machete flashing, aiming for its remaining wing. The flyer was surprisingly quick, twisting its enormous body, its massive head sweeping toward me. I ducked, feeling the wind of its passage, the stench of its breath.
I had to be faster. I had to be smarter. When the infected evolved to hunt, we had to evolve to survive. I waited for its next charge, baiting it, drawing it close. It came again, a desperate, furious assault. This time, I didn't dodge. I stood my ground, pivoting at the last second, bringing the machete up in a desperate upward thrust. The blade connected with its remaining wing, not cleanly, but with enough force to sever tendons, to tear the delicate membranes. The flyer shrieked, a sound of utter despair, its vast wing collapsing, useless. It stumbled, crashing to the ground, thrashing uncontrollably. It was grounded, immobilized, but not dead. Its head still snapped, its mouthparts still gnashed. It was still a threat. Silas was groaning, clutching his mangled shoulder, his face pale. Lena was frantically trying to bandage it, tears streaming down her face. "He's bad," Lena whispered, looking up at me, her eyes wide with fear. "He needs a doctor, now." But there were no doctors, no hospitals, just us, and the sanctuary, still days away. Michael had managed to crawl out of the cart, dragging himself toward Silas. He was crying now, his face a mess of tears and dirt. "Silas," he choked out, "hang on, you have to hang on." Silas coughed, a wet, rattling sound. Blood flecked his lips. His eyes, though clouded with pain, found mine. "Go," he rasped, his voice barely a whisper. "Go, to the facility, the last hope. Don't let this be for nothing." He reached for Lena's hand, gripping it tight. "Lena," he whispered, "you go with them. You survive. Tell 'em Silas went out fightin'." "No," Lena sobbed, clutching his hand. "No, Silas, don't you dare." His eyes closed, his breathing grew shallow, then stopped. Silas was gone. Another casualty in the silent, relentless war for humanity's survival. Another person extinguished in the brutal reality of humanity facing extinction. Lena cried, a deep, guttural sound of anguish clinging to Silas's body.
Michael, tears still streaming, buried his face in his hands. I stood there, machete still clutched in my hand, my body aching, my heart heavy. We had fought, we had won, but the cost was devastating. Silas, a hardened survivor, a good man, was gone. Lena eventually pulled herself away from Silas, her face streaked with tears and grime, but her eyes were now hard, filled with a grim, terrible resolve. "He made me promise," she whispered, her voice raw. "He said, 'Don't let this be for nothing.'" She looked at me, then at Michael, still weeping. "We keep going," she said, her voice stronger now, filled with a defiant fire. "To the sanctuary, to the last hope. We make sure his death means something." I nodded, my own throat tight. We reloaded Silas's shotgun, grabbing his remaining shells and the few extra pistol magazines Lena had for her own weapon. His gear, his legacy, now ours. We put Michael back in the cart. Lena and I took the handles, pushing it forward. The sun was setting, painting the sky in fiery streaks of red and orange, a morbidly beautiful backdrop to our renewed, desperate journey. The path ahead was still unknown, still fraught with danger. We had lost one of our own, a harsh reminder of the relentless brutality of this world. But we had also gained something, a renewed purpose, a burning resolve to honor his sacrifice. The sanctuary, Project Chimera. It was our only hope. And when the infected evolved to hunt and humanity faced extinction, we would push forward, one agonizing step at a time, until we found it. Or until we fell. We didn't know what new horrors awaited us, what new evolutions the infected had undergone. But we knew one thing: we were not giving up, not yet. We would find out if the last hope was real, or if it was just another cruel mirage in a world determined to swallow us whole. The last sliver of sunlight dipped below the horizon, plunging the forest into a deep, impenetrable darkness. The silence returned, heavy and foreboding.
And in that silence, as we pushed the cart deeper into the unknown, I felt the chilling presence of a question echoing in my mind. When all hope seemed lost, what was left to fight for?